Hi, I'm Susan Nicholas, and I love doing Kickstart demonstrations. And today's is going to focus on the basics of pastels, but helping you understand how color is one of the magnificent things behind pastels. Hi, I'm Susan Nicholas, and I love doing Kickstart demonstrations. And today's is going to focus on the basics of pastels, the surfaces that you can select, and the choices that you have in the different types of pastels. When I began doing pastels back in the early 80s, there were a limited amount of surfaces and only about 3 different brands of pastels. And so that forced me to really push the envelope of learning how to use a particular paper and how to stretch and find and accomplish the methods and the techniques through a limited amount of pastels. But today's pastelists are faced with a whole lot more choices. Papers can range from the very smooth type of papers like cançons that I have here, they come in different colors, or they can also be a sanded surface like this one, meant to capture the layers of the pastels, but they range in coarseness. When I say coarseness of pastel sanded paper, it is kind of like the shop paper that you might use to sand some things down, but it's a fine artist quality paper. And today they range from very, very coarse to smooth and delicate, like this one behind me, which is a multimedia artboard, one of my favorites. And because I began my pastel explorations back in the early 80s, I mostly worked on the colored canson papers. And that helped me develop a technique that layered very feathery, soft, veil-like colors over this smoother surface. And now I'm using the multimedia artboard. But in my teachings, I force my students to explore the smoother papers because I think it helps them develop a very light and delicate touch. Many of today's pastelists work on quite coarse surfaces. Generally, in speaking, they range in numbers, and the higher numbers represent the smoother papers, and the lower numbers represent the coarsest of papers. So that actually, if you ran your finger across it trying to blend a pastel, it would cut your skin and cause you, some harm there. So finger blenders don't do really well with coarse sanded paper, and I don't do a lot of finger blending. So I want you to think about those elements of the surface of the papers. And we'll talk more about the brands that I like and the ones that I would recommend. I'm getting ready to begin my pastel color experiment, but before I do that, I wanted to share with you something you could do at home, your own personal experiment with color. What you'll need are papers of different colors, 3 different colors, and try to have them be slightly different values, dark, medium, light value. And you also need 5 or 6 pastels, a limited color palette. And I want you to think about selecting not just soft pastels, but pull out a pastel pencil if you have them, any of the hard pastels, but a mix of different types of hardnesses and softnesses. So let's see, what else will you need? Paper towels are great, and some kind of hand protection. I'll often use something like this. Gloves in a bottle, works great. Seals your skin with a water-soluble cream that dries very quickly so that your hands don't get stained and they wash more easily. You could also use gloves, but I'll tell you 9 out of 10 times I just go straight on with my bare hands. So let me think here. Probably that and your tea or coffee. And get yourself set up. One other thing, you will need a board to tape down the small pieces of paper, and I'll show you that. It can be whatever you have handy, so you could makeshift that. I believe that's all the items that you'll need. So here are my papers that I've taped down. You can see I have 3 different values there, and I've used masking tape so you can actually see it. And I have a layer of tape here that helps catch the dust as it falls down. So if you're working upright, that's what you want to do. You don't want the pastel dust to fall on your carpet or your table. It's not as easy to clean up as you think it is because pastels are pure pigment. They're bound together with a binder, but the dust that falls down is it's if you wet it, it becomes like a paste of pure color. Very difficult to clean up, so it's often better to dry wipe. That's a good tip for you, especially if you're a beginner, and it's something that us pastels discover. If we ever have our box of pastels hit the floor, they crumble, and you want to get as much up as you can and not use water. So there's that part. So upright is one position that you can work in. That's what I like to do. I love being able to walk back and come up to my pieces. Of course, this is just an experiment, so we're playing. We're gonna have fun with this. You could just lay yours flat on the table, which would be perfectly fine, but you don't want to blow the dust. If there's an accumulation of pastel dust on it, then you want to take it over to the trash can and tap your board, and the dust will fall into the trash can bag. Okay, so these are really good tips for preparation. Back when I first began working with the pastels, and I had a limited amount of brands. I believe I had a new pastel, which is a square hard pastel, and I'll show you that in a little bit. And then I also had a box of Rembrandts that had been gifted to me, which were called soft pastels, but in actuality, in today's market, it is more like a medium hard. It's not as soft as some of the other brands, like Sennelier, which I often, it's a big usage that I have because of the creaminess of it, and what I especially like of theirs are their iridescence. But the workhorse of my soft pastel palette are the Jack Richardson hand-rolled soft pastels. They're just fantastic. And I find that as a beginner, you can basically get away with a brand of hard pastels and a mixture of soft pastels in ranges. Now, if you're just stopping into trying to understand and gather your information as a beginner, it is a very complex avenue to navigate and figure out what to get and what to buy. So later on, I'll be addressing what are the best things to use and how you can use them. But with my knowledge over the last 30-some years of working in pastels, I really understand the importance of having the right blend of both hard, medium hard to soft, and then very soft pastels. You can do very different things with each of them. So let's say someone gave you a really fabulous soft pastel box for Christmas last year, and you want to take this class to do that. It's not going to be quite enough. And so this experiment, if that's all you've got, because we're dealing with whatever you have in your pocket, in your house, but I can help you select what you need later. So let's say you only had the soft pastels. The issue that you would run into is that the softer pastels fill the tooth of the paper. What does tooth mean? Remember when I was talking about the sanded surface versus the Canson papers there that are very smooth? The tooth is the topography of the paper that allows the pastel to get caught on it and adhere. If you have a very smooth piece of paper and you're using the creamiest of softest of pastels, when you use those, what it's going to do is fill the tooth of the paper, and eventually you're going to feel like you just can't get anything to stick on it. And that's when we call it that it's too full. So the best way to deal with a smoother paper is to do your beginning stages with harder pastels, such as Jack Richardson's hard pastels or a new pastel. And those, you can control the pressure of when you float the pastel over the paper. And the harder you push, the more intense the color will be. The softer you glide it across the paper, it can just capture the top of the paper and not totally fill the tooth. And the tooth is the texture. Now, if you wanted to build many, many, many layers and start with your hard pastels and work up through the semi-hard ones like Rembrandt, and then build your way to the very creamy soft ones like Sennelier or the Jack Richardson hand-rolled pastels, those will most do their best job in the final layers. But the complexities of pastels are so plentiful in that what one experiment gives you in information, and another experiment, then you start to gather this info and you begin to realize, well, I can sometimes put the soft down and then the hard over it. But how do you learn that? So this little demo that I'm going to be doing here in a bit, might be another day, but it is going to be dealing with a limited palette of pastels, let's say 7 or 8 pastels. And I want you to have a few hard, some medium hard, and some soft. If you don't have those, use what you have. But what I'll be doing is demonstrating the idea of simultaneous color, going across these different colors so that you can actually see how a blue looks on a gray, and how that same blue looks on this kind of orangey paper, and what it looks like on this other one over here. It's just so much fun. I call it Simultaneous Color Experiment. And we'll be mounting 3 different colors. I want you to find a very dark value, a medium value, and a lighter value. And I want you to pay attention to the texture of the paper. The paper that I'm going to suggest that you use is the Canson Métien. I'm going to grab the tablet here. This is a fantastic paper to get different colored papers with a smooth side and a semi-textured side. And it's a great surface to do this experiment on. Now, why would you want to do this experiment? Well, I want you to begin to truly understand about mark making and pressure, because pastels are not just about color. The color is so enticing, and that's often what brings people into wanting to do pastels. But this experiment is going to deal with the pressure of how you move something. You can have a chance to do all the finger blending you want to do, but it will also give you a chance to understand that sometimes blending colors work best, or in a very different way, by floating a color over a color. Not just the color on the paper, but the color over another color pastel. And you can vary those pressures, hard and soft, medium. You can also take your pastel and instead of thinking of it like a point, I want you to think of it like a paintbrush. You know, if you've got a paintbrush here and you turn your pastel on the side, well, like, here we go. We've got this one right here. What if instead of using the point, we turned it on the side and we varied the pressure of it? This is a really fun Kickstart demonstration. I can't wait to do it. So we're going to be having a goal of discovering. We're going to think of ourselves like a scientist. We're going to ask ourselves questions. We're going to get to pick the colors out first, and then we're going to tape these papers down on a smaller unit. I'll show you later. And you'll be playing. I want you to just play. It'll be mark making. Not trying to do a pretty flower or a sky, but enjoying the movement of the pastel and varying the pressures. Taking a hard pastel down first, maybe doing a little finger blending, and then maybe taking it down again and varying the pressure. Perhaps then taking a soft over top of it and flipping that around. And experimenting with mark making and linear lines, cross-hatching, all of these different things like a bloom and blending and sharp pressure versus soft pressure. This little experiment is going to gain you so much knowledge. And when you go back to doing a painting, let's say like this one back here, you're going to have a pocket full of really great tips and wonderful things that will help you discover how to make a better pastel. So the next thing you're going to want to do is select your pastels. You've got your paper taped down, and going around all 4 edges and having the papers side by side is very important. So the second step is to gather your pastel colors. You want a variety of them. And I usually, let me show you this, usually put them in a tray. You can see I have them boxed out and separated from my palette. It's very helpful to have it like that. Even if you're working with a pastel, I often will separate out the colors that I'm going to use. So it's very difficult to find the ones that you were using. But today, we're just doing a playful experiment. So when would this experiment be a really good time to try it? You can do it right now, but when I found that it's the best time is when you get a brand new box of pastels. Trying out those colors that really catch your eye and comparing them with ones that you're already familiar with. You have an opportunity to learn a couple of things. So within this particular experiment, these are the things I want you to pay attention to. You're going to be discovering how to take a colored pastel across a piece of paper. Let me show you. So I'm going to grab one of my pastels. So I have this one right here. I'm going to show you what happens when I take it across here. You can't even see it. And across there, whoops, it moved. That one becomes textured. And then over to this one, beautiful. 3 very different responses to a single color. So your goal is going to be to take those 5 or 6 or 7 pastels that you have and make some play on the paper. As you go across it, you're going to be discovering a lot of things. So I'm going to get going on this now. Here we go. So I tried that pastel. One of the things you might want to do is look at what does it look like if you completely cover the paper? Or what does it look like if you slide it gently over it? Of course, over here, this is a very light color, and it may not be showing up quite as well as I'd like it to in this light, but I'm going to roll with it here. I'm going to try a second color. Let's see what happens here. Here's a chance to play around with maybe doing a bloom. I went right across the tape there. You can do that or you don't have to. I'm overlaying this over another color. And I'm going to try some finger blending. I'm just going to try some different types of experiments with the colors. So I tried that color. Let's see what happens when I introduce this purpley gray. It's almost the same color as the paper, but not quite. So as you can see, I'm basically just making random marks. That's what I want you to play with, are random marks. And then you can begin to ask yourself questions. I wonder what would happen if. I wonder what would happen if I took my finger and blended this in. Now you can't see real close at the texture of this. So hopefully you can see that the first paper is rather smooth and the next 2 are rather textured. So if you were with me in class, I'd make you take a close look. But whenever you set these papers up, you want to make sure you have a blend of soft or smoother surfaces on one of the papers and some textured so you can really get the best out of this. So I've tried that color and I have a few more I want to try. Mostly I picked up the soft pastels so far, but I'm going to grab a couple of hard pastels. You can see that they're sort of skinny and square. And here's the thing between soft and hard. The hard pastels can be a workhorse for you in that they can make a wonderful blended area that doesn't fill the tooth and the texture of the paper very much, but they also have the capability of doing these beautiful lines. Like I'm a landscape painter, so tree branches, this is what you want for a tree branch. Eyelashes for portraits, fine lines, details, really sweet marks. But they also can do these awesome edge markings if you twist and turn them to do grasses and mimic textures within your pastel. Now, the creamier, softer ones, like this one here and some of the others I've been using, are more buttery. They're not as firm and hard. The hard ones have more binder in them, and that's what makes them harder. The soft ones have a lot more pigment, and they're creamier. So therefore, oftentimes the soft pastels are quite expensive. A bit more than the hard ones because there's more pigment in these. You wonder why does a single stick of pastel cost so much? Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of paint. It's basically what it is. It's just beautiful pigment. All right, let's go on to the next part. So I'm going to play here. I'm going to try some different things. I'm about to pull the hard pastels in. As you can see here, I can get delicate lines with the hard pastel. I can overlay it. Over here, I can push it and make it go as hard, pretty hard, and I can actually take it over to soft pastel. I can actually, let's go back over here to this smoother paper, put a couple of, some of this purpley gray in there. we can actually take this pastel that I was playing with there, and I can blend it. See how I can sort of blend that? So the hard pastels can blend with the soft pastels. Now generally, I would be inclined to begin my pastel, if I was sketching, I would sketch with the hard pastel if I wanted to draw something, but we're just making lines here. So the harder I push, the darker it will be, but if I vary the pressure, it can have a softer, lighter gray. Let's go across these again. Let's take it across there. This is really fun because I'm not worrying about what I'm making. I'm just trying to discover things. All right, so I want to hold my board and really push. I'm pushing very, very hard. And you can see how dark that is. And then I lift it and it becomes lighter and it begins to mix with those pastels. So this is my little kickstart demonstration on how to introduce you to what I'm going to be doing next. So have fun with that experiment and see what you can get out of it. Each of you is going to have a very different learning experience, and I think you'll find that each time you do this, you learn something new. So it's a great kickstart demo to learn about pastels. Simultaneous color, what a single color looks like going across the different papers. Another thing I'd like you to think about when you do this is if you were to start a pastel painting, you can have the question answered by experimenting here about what color paper would you choose for a particular thing. If you have a lot of blue in the landscape, perhaps a blue paper. But if it's a soft gray paper, it might be more appropriate for setting the mood of a foggy day. If you're doing portraits and you want to have a really big punch there, you might want to use an orange or a gold paper so you can have some of that show through. So the other idea is not to necessarily cover the entire surface of all those colors. I want you to think about leaving some of the color show through so that the color of the paper becomes part of the painting. Now let's say in that experiment you lose the color of the paper and you wish you could get it back. Well, it's very difficult to get it back. So these experiments give you a chance to get some more little tips and tricks and put them in your pocket. So when you do your next pastel and you're serious about it, you will be all loosened up. This is also a great experiment to do right before you begin a painting. Select the paper that you're going to use, pick out the color palette that you think will incorporate and express the best mood and what you want to say, and give it a shot on a little piece of paper and see what you get. All right, catch you next time.